Hey everyone, it's Dan, and I'm joined by my co-host Frankie Miller today. We're from theclinicaltrialsguru.com, and today we're very fortunate to have the CEO of Inspire.com, Brian Lowe. Inspire.com is basically like the Facebook for patients, and that's what it is. It's a social network for patients who have various different types of medical conditions to interact with each other, connect with each other, share information, and hopefully have a positive experience because of it. And so Brian's here today to kind of talk to us a little bit about himself, how he got started in this industry, and then we'll focus a lot on Inspire. So thank you very much for coming on the show today, Brian.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into Inspire, just talk a little bit about yourself. Give us some background on who you are and
Sure.
how you got involved in this space.
Sure. I don't have a medical background. I'm not a physician by training. The interest for me was more around community and internet technologies and ultimately connecting patients with one another. Had experiences in my own life and with family members about the need to find information online about their health, and had a strong experience in web backgrounds. I started and operated and sold an internet company in the mid to late 90s. And a few years later, some of us from that company got together and decided we wanted to do it all over again. So with a few friends, we started Inspire. In between, I was at the Washington Post company working did a lot of work in WashingtonPost.com in the newspaper. So very interested in technology strategy. But when the opportunity for Inspire arose, it seemed like we could use technology to do something very important and to help a lot of patients. And it's actually grown far beyond, I think, what we thought in the beginning was possible, and it's really, kind of extraordinary in many ways that we didn't anticipate. So I'll describe what it is, but the other members of Inspire are in technology and sales and member support and communications, and I think our goal is to work, very efficiently with a small, tight, highly talented group of people, and for the value of the community in many respects to be built by the community members itself, the patients and caregivers who form it, and the nonprofit, the nonprofits with whom we partner.
Okay, so this is definitely not your first go-round at building a company.
No. And the idea here, I think, we originally built Inspire with the idea of accelerating clinical trial recruitment. And as you know, clinical trials are, for many appropriate reasons, it's very difficult to find patients who want to participate. As we like to think of it, it's appropriately illegal to buy lists of names of patients, right? Mm-hmm. But this means that it's difficult. So while you can go out and buy lists of coffee drinkers or Rolex wearers or, people who buy certain brands of sneakers, you can't buy lists of patients with leukemia or ovarian cancer, and I think that's the way it should be. But the question is, how do you let patients know that clinical trials exist? Some studies that were done by the creators of clinicaltrials.gov, early on, found that less than 10% of people, and this was years ago, but I think it hasn't changed much, less than 10% of people even could describe what a clinical trial is, and far fewer than that 10% knew how they would ever get involved in one. And, as we know, the vast majority of patients historically who've participated in clinical trials did so because their physician informed them about the trial and recommended that they participate. And while we still believe that the physician should be the one who plays that role with the patient in deciding whether a trial is appropriate, what we realized is that we could do a lot to raise awareness of the existence of the trial so the patients could then bring that to their physician and have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
How exactly does Inspire do that? Is it primarily, I've visited the site, but maybe for someone who
Sure.
Can you kind of explain the primary purpose? Is it mostly to connect with patients, or do you guys actually provide content to the patients?
When we started Inspire, we looked at what had come before us, and we saw that there were a number of patient registries and sites that were created with the goal of finding patients for trials, but there was no real mechanism for attachment or stickiness or reasons for patients to come back frequently. So our idea was that instead of saying to patients, come join a community about clinical trials, what we would say is come join a community about your medical condition. Join others for all of the things involved in your condition. And sometimes we're talking about very serious conditions and in other cases less serious, whether you are a patient or a caregiver. And spend a lot of time here for those reasons. And then 6 months later or whenever it comes up, we, Inspire, will let you know that a clinical trial exists and invite you to participate. And I think that's a crucial difference. So the result of that is that there's a reason for patients to come and to spend time, and there's a mechanism for keeping them engaged along the way. So I think in my mind, or in our company's mind, we think of Inspire really as having two halves. One is the patient community side, where, by the way, 99.9% of the content is generated by the members themselves. Wow. And we use the word member rather than patient. And then the other side of it is providing appropriate access to industry, so pharma, biotech, device companies, to those patients on a very strongly controlled permission basis. And the one thing that we do that I believe is absolutely unique and is a real differentiator is that we partner with national patient advocacy organizations. So names that you would know, like the National Osteoporosis Foundation or the Arthritis Foundation or the National Psoriasis Foundation. And in each case, we set up exclusive relationships with them where we create their community within Inspire. We moderate it with live human moderators. We operate it. We take care of all the software and hardware. And in exchange for all this, which we provide to them for free, they allow us to provide access to those patients in appropriate ways with pharma. And so clinical trials was the first method, the first use of that, and I think it's the one we're talking about today. But it turns out that this is good for other things as well, like health-focused market research and awareness campaigns and things like that.
Right.
So back to your question, the idea is, so let's say you join Inspire and you say that you have, let's say you're the parent of a preemie and a sufferer of arthritis. You're engaged in Inspire and you do all the things that you do, which is the Facebook kinds of things that you sort of what you alluded to a moment before, except we find that your interactions are typically more disease-specific and a lot richer and deeper when it comes to the medical condition. And then some amount of time later, we learn about a clinical trial from one of our customers, a pharma company, and we send you an email that says the following. This trial exists. Here's information about it. Here's the link to it on clinicaltrials.gov. We know your zip code, although we don't yet know your street address or your real name or your phone number. We say that you're 12 miles away from an investigative site for the trial. You seem to meet some of the initial inclusion criteria, and we ask you if you would like to participate, if you'd like to learn more about participating in the trial. Mm-hmm. And then crucially, only if you affirmatively say yes, and by the way, you've already said yes when you joined Inspire to receiving this kind of communication. Right. If you affirmatively say yes again, we then introduce you to the trial sponsor, and then we, for the most part, step out of the picture. So what we're bringing to you is perhaps appropriate trials. What we're bringing to the pharma companies is highly targeted qualified patients. We ask you to take screeners and to sort of tell us a lot about your conditions. We sort of do everything except draw blood, as it were. But then we exit the process. So we're not involved in running the trial or tracking you through the trial. With one exception, we do stay in touch with you since you're an Inspire member, and we're able to ask you about your experiences with the trial and the investigators, and in some cases, we're able to report that back to the pharma companies in a de-identified aggregate fashion.
Mm-hmm. Take me back through the process that you just explained.
Sure.
So, because I'm interested in this kind of stuff, so let's say the person has already agreed to kind of receive notifications about trials. You send them a link on clinicaltrials.gov. Isn't there a danger that they can call the study director themselves without going through you?
There is, although I think we don't think of that as danger. Rather, the email that we send to them, our goal, I think we have a couple of ethical principles. One is to be absolutely transparent. The other is to be is to sort of push information outward. So the recipient of this email gets email that says a couple of key points. One is this trial exists. We, Inspire, are not recommending it or advocating it. Mm-hmm. If you're considering this, you should go to your physician about it and talk about it the way you would anything else. Here's lots of information about it. And in that case, we think clinicaltrials.gov is a solid authoritative source for that information. And here's how to take yourself through the path. So we then give them a link that they click that takes them through this screener and then introduces them to the sponsor. So what I would say is that I believe that what happens is, for the most part, they use that clinicaltrials.gov link as part of their research.
Mm-hmm.
But we make it so easy for them to actually connect with the sponsor that I think it's easier for us to do than to call the sponsor. And frankly, if a few of them do call the phone number for the sponsor, that's okay. We certainly would never try to prevent that. But I think in practice that happens rarely.
And would the member, I'm trying not to say patient, would the member
Sure.
know which one of their friends or which one of their contacts has done the study or is in the study? Would they know that? Would they see that information?
They wouldn't. So that's actually a crucial question. So they could talk to one another about it. So friends could compare notes and things like that to some extent. But the communication that comes from us to the member is not in the community. So it's not like Facebook or something like that where the message would be amidst all of the other information. The email that we send them is direct. It's one-way communication. As you know, DDMAC and the regulatory issues sort of informed a lot of the way we designed this. And so the email comes directly from us, and they don't know who else has received that email.
Okay.
Or why, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would imagine there's a great deal of interest from the pharma companies, but how about the CROs? Are they contacting you guys? And also, how about patient recruitment firms like Accurian and other people like that?
We've worked directly with pharma companies, and I think we've pretty much focused on that because I think, to be frank, we enjoy the lack of an intermediary. That is, we can work directly with the sponsor and we can optimize things and all of that. It's not to say that we wouldn't be thrilled to work with CROs if it were the right kind of relationship, but we've just focused our energy on the pharmas and biotechs and device companies.
Have any questions here for Brian?
No, but I'm really fascinated, Brian. I'm just
Thank you.
anxious to hear you tell us more about it.
Sure.
Now, how many members do you guys have in your community?
We have on a monthly basis, we have around 1 million people who visit Inspire, and we have almost 200,000 registered members. And it's that latter number that is required for us to be able to contact someone. So if you visit Inspire today, that's nice, but what we'd like you to do is sign up and register. And I can tell you some interesting things if you'd like about the kinds of people who join, if you'd like.
Yeah, please do.
So I might make 3 points. One is that there's something very interesting going on with gender. It turns out that 79% of our registered members are female. And initially this surprised us, and we thought about it a lot. And it doesn't surprise us at all now. Women, for various reasons, have been described as the chief medical officers of the home. And often women in Inspire are there not just for themselves, but for members of their family. So they're, their husbands or fathers or children. And, a lot of research has been done that shows that this seems to be true irrespective of whether these women are the chief breadwinners. And so even our prostate cancer community is 50% female. And it's not because they have prostate cancer. They're there for people close to them. And this turns out to be perfectly fine for clinical trials because those women are not reluctant at all to, grab the male in their life and, bring them into, whatever role. So I think gender is interesting. It doesn't mean that the 21% of members who are men are somehow different, but I think it is, it is just something to think about and note. And I always mention it when I talk to men because I think sometimes, there are gender differences, and we, in our own minds, think about what we might like to do or participate in. Sometimes our own gut feeling about things does not transfer to other kinds of people. The second thing I would say is about age. And so we see, this is not something for 20-somethings, and a lot of data has shown, studies by AARP and Pew have shown that when seniors go online, a lot of what they do is for health. And we have a large presence in the organic search space, and so a lot of people discover Inspire through Google and other search engines. And in fact, the demographics of our membership is the average age of Inspire members is 50 years old. And so, it's not the cliche kind of social networking, experience. But I think obviously this has changed a lot with Facebook. People of all ages are on Facebook now. But we do recognize that many of our members, this is their first real social network experience. And so we go out of our way to not accidentally trick people, to make sure that the interface is really easy to understand. And we put a lot of effort into that kind of usability and clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final thing I would say about the patients and caregivers is that they seem to be unusually engaged in their condition. So we see response rates that are very high because by the time someone has become a member of Inspire, they've gone out of their way to search for this site, read about it, and then join. So they're not a random sampling of the population. So if we take a condition like osteoporosis or lung cancer, what we find is that the people in the community are self-informed. They're actively seeking information. When a clinical trial comes up, they have, it seems, an unusual interest in it, and I mean that in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
But it also means that if you're a researcher and you're looking for a truly random sampling in the population, we are not a good source to come to.
Now, I'm on the site now, and if you don't register, if you're not a registered member,
right,
you can still go in the communities. So let's say you have asthma, you can click on asthma, and you can read about, other members with asthma are writing about, right? So that's
right.
That's the user-generated that you're talking about?
Exactly, and we want that to be the case because we want you to be able to get a feel for it before you join. But there are a couple things you can't. So one is if you click on another member's icon or profile, you won't be able to see information about them. You have to log in to do that. Okay. And the other is that you're missing about 1/3 of the overall content. So when you write a journal entry or a discussion in Inspire, you're able to mark it public or private. And right now, about 2/3 of the content in Inspire is public, so that's what you're seeing, and then about 1/3 is private. We haven't done a very good job of explaining to people that there's more information for you to see if you log in. I think we have in some places, but that's another reason to join, is because you can see that additional content. And interestingly, what we found is that some disease categories, people are more inclined to write public content, and some are more inclined to write private content. Mm-hmm. For example, in our infertility community, there's a lot of desire to make content private, which is fine with us.
Now, let's say I'm going to ask you a question here
Sure.
about safeguards you put in place. Let's say I'm a Shady study participant recruiter, okay? And I got a difficult study to recruit for, so I watch this interview and I go to Inspire, and I sign up as a patient who has diabetes, although I don't have diabetes. And then I start interacting with other people, and I start friending everybody, and then private messaging them, hey, I got a study here. I'm sure you've ran into this already, have you not?
Yeah, I'm smiling because people have tried to do precisely what you're describing, and there are a couple of things. So it's actually forbidden in our terms of use. So at the bottom of every page, there's a terms of use. Now, I realize that not everyone reads all the terms of use, but by becoming a member, they agree to that. So it's actually not permitted to do that. But as you said, if someone is shady, they might not be concerned with what's permitted. So we have mechanisms in place to detect when people are, when there are unusual patterns of activity. Let's describe it that way. And so we have the ability to, when we observe things like that, just to get involved. And occasionally we do ban members. And we ban them for a couple different reasons, but in that kind of case, there's no hesitation. That's absolutely wrong. And there are a couple other situations like that where people are trying to sell something or engage in other kinds of inappropriate activity. And by the way, if that person were from a legitimate recruitment company, what we would like them to do is to call us up and ask us to help them, and we do that.
Because they have to pay for it.
Everything about Inspire is free. It's free for the members. It's free for the nonprofit patient advocacy organizations. The only way that we pay the bills is with, is from industry, and so it's important that we protect that.
Right, with the recruiters. So, I'm sure it's been tried before. Now, what if it's a genuine patient who has, let's say he's just done a lot of studies and he's got genuine advice, but he's not recommending his friends the studies that you guys have?
That's okay. That's quite different. So we don't forbid people from talking about studies, and in fact, people are talking about particular clinical trials all the time, and we think that's 100% okay. We don't let patients sell their non-health related, we're not a store. We don't let people make commercial advertisements, but the kind of thing you described is perfectly okay. And frankly, there's a lot of it, and I think that's a good thing.
And talk to us, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have some kind of option where you could upload, the members can upload their health records?
We do not, no.
Oh, okay.
No, I think that's a really interesting, area of health and of sort of empowered patients, but it's not something we do currently. And we've been kind of sort of watching what's been happening there, and I think, frankly, it's very difficult for us to tell which electronic health record is the right one for patients to use.
Yeah, have you heard about Google Health shutting down?
Yes, it's a shame. It's really, I was sorry to hear that, and I think a lot of us were, because it just seemed like Google has so many resources and so much potential to do great things there. I wish that the project had more resources allocated and it sort of achieved what it sought out to do.
Now, Brian, switching gears a little, let's talk about yourself. I believe you said you founded this company in 2005. Is that correct?
Right, founded it with a few friends, and we started it back then. Our head of technology and our head of partnerships, Walter and Amir, were the co-founders, and we started this, with this very sort of interesting and specific goal. And I think, we've all been kind of thrilled with the way that it's grown. It's taken on a life of its own in many respects. And I think we're going to be doing it for the foreseeable future.
Now, what, pardon the pun, but what inspired you to create this site? Was it?
Oh, a couple of things. One was, it's just a personal side. I was at the Washington Post for several years working in technology strategy, and there was a group at the Post very interested in social networks, and so I just learned a huge amount about that. And at the same time, my wife works in a role that was very close to the heads of R&D at pharmaceutical companies, and I got to know many of them, and they described just the pain and difficulty in recruiting for clinical trials, despite, enormous resources. And so the inspiration, if you will, the light bulb that went off in the beginning was, what if you could create patient communities organized by therapeutic area and let patients raise their hand and volunteer to participate in the trial? And when we began Inspire, that was a pretty revolutionary idea. And in fact, when we wrote the original business plan and talked to a lot of these really experienced people in pharma, what we were told was that building patient communities like that hadn't really been done in this way before, and they didn't know if it could be done. And I think we've shown that it can be. Now, of course, there are other companies that have done similar things, and that's great to see.
Mm-hmm. And so the user-generated content, that's something that always existed from day one almost? Or?
Yeah, I'll talk for a minute about that, because I think we all get excited. I'm personally really excited by that. I think on an average day, 500,000 words are written by members of Inspire. That's about 2 times the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times. Gigantic amount of content, and it's very high quality stuff for the most part if you read it. Today, in fact, we hit 400 million words in Inspire. So wow. It's a big number, and there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge in those words, and I think it's just an indication that none of these people are paid to write this. We're not telling them to write it. People wake up in the morning, they're concerned about their medical condition, they go to Inspire, they read and they write, they create really deep friendships. There are groups of Inspire members who have gone on retreats together. A group of ovarian cancer patients just formed. Same thing with bladder cancer. They wear Inspire buttons and badges. I feel great about the fact that people have formed really deep friendships and gotten a lot out of it, completely in addition to the business side of the company. So yeah, there's a huge amount of sort of activity going on, which I think to us is one of the best indications that this is something people want to use. They're doing it of their own volition.
Right. Now, do you get a lot of your new members from Google, from search engines, or from other members, other existing members?
That's exactly. It's really 3 sources. One is search engines. The other is or viral things, so friends inviting friends. And the third, which is very significant, is these nonprofit patient advocacy organizations.
Okay.
So, for example, if you go to the National Psoriasis Foundation or the Alzheimer's Foundation of America and you look at their community, that community is in Inspire, and so people often discover it and join. And similarly, many patients who find Inspire via Google, we then link back in many ways to the associations, and we direct traffic to them as well. So those are the three sources.
Yeah, I can definitely see how this works, because before this interview, I just thought people who already knew about clinical trials would go there.
No, quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. In fact, only a small fraction of our members will ever participate in a clinical trial that we offer, and we recognize. I think this is crucial. We recognize that the mechanism of attachment, the reason that people go every day or every week, is not because of that. It's because of the friendships and the relationships and the support that they get from the community.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have any metrics on how many of you join studies, and also maybe how many sponsors do you work with, or do you have specific relationships with certain sponsors?
I can mention a couple of the companies we've worked with, and I can give you some metrics. So we've worked with Merck and Pfizer and Novartis on clinical trials specifically. And I can tell you that in general, when we send outreach to our members, we see general response rates to our outreach of around 20%. And then depending on what the campaign is, oftentimes the funnel gets narrowed a lot or a little bit. So, for example, we did a lung cancer trial that had not only very specific inclusion-exclusion criteria, but also very specific geographical constraints. And so, we started off with a large number of people, and then had quite a narrowing, and were able to refer the right number of people for the trial. And I think the important takeaway from that is that there's not sort of one metric that works here. There's some optimization that goes on when a particular trial comes up, and figuring out whether it's going to be successful or not. And sometimes we say no. We recently said no to a trial that was in a therapeutic area we didn't think that we had enough patients for. On the other hand, when we do have enough patients, it's quite successful.
So the sponsors approach you, or do you guys actively seek new sponsors? Do you have business development?
Both. We're absolutely seeking them. I think we've reached the point now where we get contacted by them as well, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add one interesting thing that some sponsors are interested in, but I think are struggling a little bit with the regulatory environment. Is this one of the things we've proposed? Is that if a sponsor knows that a trial is coming up in, say, 18 months, then it's going to be particularly difficult to recruit, that we could help them build a community of patients that are part of Inspire that would be sort of ready and available when the trial comes up. So our tagline has always been recruit in advance. So it's, and I think that's an idea which has been very appealing to a number of sponsors. One sponsor has actually done it. But in other cases, I think sponsors want to do it, but they're still not sure whether this is a legal and regulatory perspective. And I think, the uncertainty around pharmacovigilance is still causing them, pause. It's something I'm sure you hear about a lot, but it's...
Yeah, it's definitely something that will have to be addressed at some point or another, but for now, right. I mean, there's certain guidelines you follow. Which guidelines specifically do you have to follow, or is it just specific to whatever IRBs are dealing with the study?
It's interesting that it's specific to each company. So what we've found is that, and also even within individual companies, some pharma companies are so gigantic that different divisions of the company have different internal legal guidelines. And I give a lot of credit to each of these companies for, in the absence of clarity from FDA, having to figure out what to do and what not to do. But the real answer to your question is that we find it's actually slightly different from company to company. Yeah.
Well, very interesting. As we wrap up, Brian, we talked a little bit in the pre-interview about how to keep your members engaged, because everyone
right.
who has a social network wants to increase the amount of time spent on their site.
Right.
So, any games coming up? Are you guys seriously considering that?
I mean,
Health
we
games.
joked a long time ago that if one, Zynga for health, that could be, powerful. I think it's not a crazy idea, and I know that you may know Kias, which is Adam Bosworth's company, is actually beginning to do that now, and I think it's not a crazy idea. What I would say is this: I think one of the questions we ask a lot is when a patient or caregiver wakes up in the morning, what makes them go to Inspire? And I think at the core of it, it's not because we're doing anything particularly aggressive with respect to them. It's simply that we're making it available. And the reason they go is because they want to be there with other people who know what it's like and are dealing with the same thing. And so I think the motivation to play games is one thing, but the motivation to Inspire currently is that people really just want to connect with other people who know what it's like and who can support and take care of each other. And we try to do as good a job of that as we can.
Mm-hmm. Frankie, as a PA, what would you think about your patients, let's say, playing a game on one of these social networks that's related to their health and somehow encouraging them to, be compliant or whatever it may be?
I think it would. I think it'd be a neat thought, a really neat thought. Brian, could I ask?
Sure.
I confess I haven't spent a lot of time on Inspire, but I did look at the disease processes or the illnesses that are mentioned there. And will the day come when I will see more on more disease processes or diseases or illnesses, or is that kind of like where you guys are going to stay?
Oh, wait, say that again. Will you see more what?
More illnesses. For instance, I saw allergies.
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. We're adding conditions all the time. So today we have 75 national patient advocacy organizations as exclusive partners, and we're adding new ones all the time. And so, we also know that we have some real holes. There are some disease categories that we'd very much like to add. Until recently, one of those was Alzheimer's, until we added the Alzheimer's Foundation. And, currently diabetes is a good example of a hole. So you will see them continue to be added. Last month alone, we added colorectal cancer and short bowel and a few others. So the answer is yes. Yes, we'd like to add as many as possible.
And so just keep checking back, huh?
Exactly.
Okay. I think it is a fantastic idea. I really think it's fantastic, and I could see where you do build. I mean, there are communities there, because support and all of that is absolutely critical in many of these diseases, and it ultimately, whatever your goal may or may not have been, I think that this forms a glue for the participants. And,
Thank you.
And they get support. They have hope. At the same time, they can face reality. And facing reality, with someone else, with the same disease or illness, is much easier than trying to face it alone, if you will.
That's right. And you made me think of one other thing I should mention, which is that when we started the company, a lot of physicians said to us, not a lot, but a common theme among physicians was to say things like, and this was 6 years ago, was to say, well, should patients really be talking to each other without a physician in the room? Literally saying that. And I think what we've learned over time is that the conversations patients have among each other are different than the conversations they have with physicians. And it's not a question of better or worse, although some people will argue that there are questions of better or worse. What I would say is that they're having different conversations. For the most part, patients are not adjusting their Lipitor dosage based on the recommendation of friends. What they're talking about is very practical issues about their condition that could only be answered by another patient. And so I think patients somehow appropriately and intuitively recognize what are good things to talk with each other about and what are good things to talk with their physician about. And I think the combination of the two is what's ultimately the most powerful.
Right. And there are a number of questions that just cannot be fit. They can't be addressed, or there's not the time when you're visiting your doctor. And
absolutely.
And yeah, to have someone else with that same illness, or who may have crossed that bridge, so to speak,
Right.
To guide you or help you or advise you, or I think that's a big thing. I think that's a really big thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brian. We'll definitely have to do some follow-up interviews later on to see how Inspire is progressing.
We'd love to. And thank you for interviewing us, and we'd love to keep you posted.
Yes, stay on the line. We'll talk a little bit afterwards. This is Dan and signing off with Brian from Inspire.com, and this is theclinicguru.com. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.